Welcome to this week's episode. This is a really interesting, fun episode for me because I met Shardule Shah, who is our guest today, a couple of years ago. We were both in the building stage of a startup, and as I just said to him before we started, his startup is is still going, whereas that my last startup is not. But Shardule is the CEO and co-founder of Lime Therapeutics. They were started in earnest, we'll say, in 2023. There were some activities before then. And Shardule, we are happy to have you on to talk about how to build a startup biotech. We'd love to hear what is on your mind.
What's on my mind right now is how to empower my team to make the best discoveries possible. And to dig a little bit more into that, I'm always actively thinking about what activities should our team be doing at our headquarters and what activities should we be contracting our external partners with. So that balance to get the productivity that is needed and balancing that with internal productivity and external, that is what is at the top of my mind right now.
So do you have some kind of sort of like rule of thumb that you use, or like what is your, it's a really important question. It's one that Eric and I are starting to grapple with, but we keep sort of procrastinating on our, what is your, do you have sort of a philosophy on this?
Yeah, and I'll credit my co-founder and CTO Prakrit for designing this philosophy. It is do the really key intellectual property work, the really novel work, do that inside or internal. Anything that requires a lot of kind of pivoting and things like that, do that internally because the team is best suited to be able to navigate those challenges. Once we figured out a process and how to make things routine, that is when we start to figure out how do we then effectively contract. Are there people out there that are doing what we're looking for and can do it at what would be a fraction of the price with the same quality that we would have taken internally? So, Jeff, the rule of thumb that I would employ is that we do all of the really key intellectual property work internally, but if there's anything that can be automated, some can call it outsourced or whatever the case may be, that's what I try and look for at the end of the day.
Yeah, so it's an interesting area to consider, this outsource versus in-house. There's, I think one of the areas where Jeff and I and Elena have come across this before is sort of in the leadership space, where people don't want to outsource because they want to be the hero of their story, as opposed to outsourcing it and giving it over to somebody. And I always say, like, eventually, as you become a higher and higher level leader, you need to realize that your job is to get things done and not to do things. Have you experienced, how have you experienced that growth? I mean, going into, becoming a CEO, compared to other roles you've had in the past?
I think that the way that I think about it is that the team that we've built up, they all have their individual superpowers as scientists, as research associates, and whoever else that we're bringing on. And we want to leverage those superpowers to the best of our ability. That's what creates true team. And if you're talking about outsourcing, I have had to come to terms with the fact that, yes, we won't be doing everything within our New York City headquarters. There will be things that will be done outside of our headquarters. And we, as a company, as we grow, just don't have the time, the bandwidth, the capability to do everything in-house. So part of my growth as a leader has been the understanding that despite the incredible superpowers that each member of my team holds, there are still things that are beyond our bandwidth, beyond our ability. So those are the things that I am making sure that we do get done externally, because it's all about driving productivity. How can you build the most productive company possible? And that goes back to the very beginning of the question here about balancing the talent you have internally with what can be done externally. And that is really what I think about on an everyday basis.
So I want to ask you a question about that, Shardule. External contracting, the disease states that you are tackling are not easy, right? Cancer being the focus. How difficult is it for legal, regulatory, talent availability? How easy is it to find outside contractors, keeping the KPI that you mentioned that it needs to be well done, right?
That's a great question. And it's hard because I'll give you a particular example. There's one CRO or contract research organization that we are working with in which we are their first customer. And so the reason that we chose to work with them is because they provided an extremely specialized type of experiment that we needed to get done that we could not get done at other larger brand, what I might call the Walmart of CROs. And so when I'm thinking about this outsourcing, I have to be very careful to pick partners carefully because number one, I have come across experiences where the big box CROs say that they can do something, but in fact, that is not what they're capable of delivering. So then in that case, it makes sense to go with the smaller boutique one. But on the flip side, if there's something that, again, that is pretty routine, then it might be wiser to go with a bigger one that can provide these cost controls. So, Elena, to your question again about outsourcing specifically, we have to be very picky with our partners. Can they deliver on what they said that they deliver on time and within budget?
Yeah,
Do you find that there's go ahead,
I was just going to say, it's interesting as you've been talking about this, and you talked about superpowers. Like I've often heard like people say in terms of what you should in-house versus outsource is figure out what your superpowers are, do that, and then push everything else out. And I think that's really interesting. But you added a nuance to this that I think is really that I hadn't thought about before, which is you mentioned this idea of like if it's something that's being pivoted on, there are lots of decisions that need to be made or whatever, that's not necessarily a superpower issue, but it makes sense to keep that in-house because you have to move in order to move at the speed at which you need to move to make all those decisions. If that's outsourced some other continent, whatever it is, like you're probably not going to get it done as fast. So I thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. I definitely agree with that because if you have your team internally and you need to make a quick experimental decision, hey, can we test this? Can we test this? It is so much faster to do that, doing that within your own internal team versus, as you were saying, Jeff, communicating with the CRO who may be in a different time zone than you and having that change come across. And it may not even come across in the way that you are presenting it because you can present, I want to have change A, but they may interpret it as something else. So yeah, that nuance that I was trying to add on top of that basic framework holds true because if you have to do something that's really, really novel in terms of biology, and sometimes you don't have a path forward, you don't have a map to how to get it done, some of those things are just best done internally no matter what.
So I have a question about, so one of the things that, so Jeff and I have this marketing company that we've been building up, and we are in the position of trying to convince people. So we're playing the other role, the provider, obviously not a research organization, but, similar thing. We're trying to convince people that it's best to do this outsource, or it would be a good idea to at least consider outsourcing this. But I think there's this feeling amongst a lot of, whether it's startups or more established businesses, is that we can just hire someone internally. We're going to be able to ramp them up faster. They're going to know our stuff better. And, it's going to all work out so much better. And the reality of that is that that's not always the case. In fact, it's probably 50-50, if not worse than that person's going to ramp up much slower. It's going to cost a lot more, or it's going to cost the same amount, but you're going to be much slower to get to the point where you need to be, which, in the time equals money kind of equation actually makes it costly from that perspective. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And it sounds like you've kind of overcome at least some, if not all of that thinking, but I would love to get your thoughts on how do you think people should think about this question?
Yeah, I think that the first line of defense is bringing in the right talent internally.
Right.
So I think that what I pride myself on is putting together the people who don't need a lot of ramp up time, number one, and are brought in because they can learn very quickly, and from whatever background that they may have come from, are able to understand the mission of the company and what we're building. So that's how I consider the first line of defense. But with the other point that you were talking about, Eric, other than that, I think that I don't have necessarily any reservations about using outside help, because we are, at the end of the day, we're a lean biotech. We have some amount of money in the bank, but we also effectively have to do the same kind of R&D output that a large biotech or pharma might have at the end of the day. So my sole focus is on how do we generate the kind of productive output that will allow the company to develop these breakthrough medicines to get into clinical trials and beyond within the parameters of what we have. So it's my job, I feel, as a CEO, to have no ego about how that is done. If that is done with the team internally, great. If that is done externally with the right partners, that's great too. It's mission-driven focus on creating medicines that will be effective.
So I'm going to jump into. It's interesting because we, as you know, when we were setting up this episode, having this conversation, we often ask people like what title. And so the title of this week's episode is "Running Your Own Race: How to Build a Biotech Startup."
Yeah.
And I loved that title that you proposed. You proposed it, so hopefully you remember that. But I love that title, partly because it was a little mysterious to me. Like, how do you think about this idea of? Tell me about this idea of like running your own race. It's interesting. Like, as you were talking about like running your own race, and we're talking about outsourcing stuff and whatever. Like, I guess that I was like, I wonder exactly what you were thinking when you put that title together. So, I'd be interested to hear what your thought process was there.
It stems from a couple of different things. One, it stems from my background as a marathon runner. Because I've been fortunate to do a few of those, including an ultra marathon a number of years ago. Wow. And so I think about I was never designed personally to be a sprinter. That's just not in my genes. I'm never going to beat somebody in 100-yard dash. But I know that in my bones, I can outlast almost anybody. And so the way that I think about translating that into a company building context is that there are so many ways to build a successful company. And by the way, I'm not saying that what I've done has been successful, but I know that the pathway to success, there are many avenues to doing that. One, I know people join venture capital formed companies right out of the gate. That's not the way that I built out my company. I built it very much from the ground up. So it's incumbent upon me to ignore almost a lot of the noise that I see. There are so many news items of, okay, this company raised this much, this company raised this much, this company went down in flames. And so I'm aware of what's going on, but I don't get distracted by it because that may not be relevant to what I'm doing. So when I'm thinking about the theme of running my own race, I have to build Lime the way that it was meant to be built.
Mhm.
I don't have to build Lime that the way that another successful biotech was built. So that's why I'm really focused on when I say run my own race, it is focused on the kind of the playing the long game. That
Mhm.
if this is going to be a company that I want to keep going and head toward an eventual successful exit for the company, it has to be playing the long game, and I have to avoid the noise that comes with companies succeeding or failing at every step of the way.
So I also think that it may be the nature of what you're doing, because it is the innovation that's not done anywhere else, right? Biotech innovation, it's very much venturing into the unknown. So KPIing yourself on others is not fair, because they are in a different category, they are in different circumstances, they have different amounts of money. So it is very much your own race, also because you are very much in the uncharted waters, I think.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, because ultimately, if you seek out enough advice from people, you will get 360 degrees of feedback. And so
That's true.
then it becomes a point of what do you actually follow at the end of the day. So Elena, to your point, absolutely, that's what we try and figure out, is that there's just so much going on. Like, what speaks true to you? What speaks true to the way that you should build a company? And I think that's the way that any startup entrepreneur, whether they are in biotechnology or not in biotechnology, that's how they should build, because that's how they should build. Because while it's great to be nimble and pivot accordingly, which you should be, I would rather go to the grave knowing that I executed my vision to the best of my ability, rather than going to the grave thinking I didn't give it the best shot that I felt. I just ended up listening to a whole bunch of people who didn't have all the information at hand, and I just didn't do it right. So that's why I'm so focused on, yes, get external input. There are a lot of great people that can help, but really tailor every piece of advice to building the company the way that I see fit to be built.
All right,
It's
Shardule.
interesting.
So let's just not go to the grave here, but to cure proverbial cancer, would you?
I'm sorry,
You
So,
do that.
can we cancer? Can we cure cancer?
no, he's just saying instead of going to the grave.
You cure proverbial cancer.
Let's go.
Yeah.
That's what we're built on doing, and I see this every day, both within my company and with other companies that are making substantial progress. We're headed in the right direction, absolutely. So the proverbial, and some cancers have already been effectively cured, of course, as we know, but we are headed in that right direction where we can see substantial differences in the lives of patients.
So I wanted to, going back to what you said before about sort of kind of sticking with your vision and not overly, kind of overly pivoting every time you hear somebody. I got let's call it a second row seat. I wasn't necessarily in the first row, but front row seat, but of watching a founder trying to raise money and, being in a handful of the meetings and seeing the mission of the company change every time we talk to it. In other words, like what we were doing was whatever the last, to VC number 10 was whatever VC 9 told us we should be doing. And I just kind of always felt like chasing that was a losing game ultimately. Anyway, and I maybe after the chat GPT segment we're going to do in about 30 seconds, I'd love to get into that topic of fundraising in general, and also that question, your thoughts on that question as well.
Sure.
So maybe Jeff, you want to jump into before we get into that topic?
So I don't know.
ChatGPT?
I gotta tell you, like, I feel like ChatGPT. I might have to. I've been using ChatGPT a lot recently. I probably need to switch to a different one because I feel like some of the questions start to sound similar. But I always like to ask: do you want absurd first or thought provoking first?
Let's go absurd.
All right, I would say 9 out of 10, doctors go the absurd first, so you're with the majority. That one's more okay. That's thought provoking. Hold on.
having trouble with absurdity today.
Oh, it's okay. I gotta just get it right. It says, what's your startup's official policy on fake it till you make it, and is there a Slack emoji for that? I don't even know why. It's absurd, and it's not even. It's like kind of a non sequitur.
Absurd or not, that to some degree relates to Eric's prior question. Right?
Yeah, the fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, there is no. In this field, there is no fake it until you make it. We are driven by data. We are driven. Yeah. So there is, unfortunately, we do utilize Slack quite a bit for communication, but there's no Slack emoji for the fake it till you make it. We have a party parrot emoji. We have a lot of fun other emojis that we can talk about, but that's not the game. So, no,
I just have to disagree with you for 1 second, Shardule. Like, there are plenty of fake it till you make it people out there. There shouldn't be in biotech, but there are plenty of people who you're like, you really do not have any idea what you're doing.
Yeah, no, look, there's a very fine line, at least in terms of the vision, between being optimistic, selling your vision. That is par for the course. You have to do that. But then if you cross the line into, let's just put it out there, just making up things, that's just blatantly wrong. And you're playing with human lives at the end of the day. So I just don't understand who would want to do that on a moral or ethical basis. And I used to think, and I still think that I'm building a company that I say that my children can be proud of. And so when I'm building things, I'm thinking, okay, am I building things in the way that they can see that they're proud of, that their dad is building? So whether it is how we go about talking to people, how we present our data, like everything is grounded in fact. Yes, we are optimistic in how we can make a difference. You have to be that way, but everything is grounded in data. That's what it comes down to.
So my thought-provoking question is, what's hard? But this actually starts to get at some of what Eric was talking about, so it'll be a lead in. What's harder, fundraising in a down market or trying to explain your job to your extended family?
I would say fundraising in a down market is harder. And I'll tell you why.
Is it because your extended family all has PhDs?
No. It's because a lot of them are so interested in what we're building. I'll give you a very concrete example. I recently had a Zoom webinar. I titled it as an investor the but I also had a few other interested parties come along. It wasn't just investors. And the people, we had a total of about, between the investors and interested parties, we had close to about 80 people. And it ranged from deep domain experts that knew the mutational profile of what we were building, all the way to my mom and dad, who are incredibly smart people, but they are not domain experts here. So so to your question, Jeff, I think that the extended communication piece, that's what I do every day. And so that's what I have to do. And so I would say fundraising in a down market can be a bit more challenging because I love the extended communication piece. And it's what I do every single day. But that challenge of the fundraising in the down market is also what I have to tackle. And I do enjoy that. I do also enjoy that as well.
So so this has been something we started talking about this topic before the episode started, about fundraising, and it is a down market, particularly biotech. Somebody I talked to recently called this a rolling recession, in the sense that it's affecting some industries and not others. And one of the industries is clearly affecting is the biotech industry. Plus, there's a lot of upheaval in the science space in general for, particularly academic science, but that bleeds over, et cetera. Tell us about, and I also, the startup that I mentioned that you and I originally were talking, when we started talking, I talked to several dozen VCs, and so it is an interesting process, and you get lots of feedback, and whatever. So tell us about your journey in fundraising, and where's that going, and what have you learned about it?
So the journey is really two parts. One part is what we have built so far, and that was building out Lime Therapeutics on this vision of creating new medicines for diseases like in cancer, like we've talked about, and building a company from there. That's kind of what I call the past. When we look to the future, I think about the fundraising journey in the context of what are we trying to create? What we're trying to create, the next step, which is really taking medicines through clinical trials. And then you have to connect that vision with what kind of capital will be required for that vision to be executed. That's step 2. And step 3 is, how do you communicate that vision? Not with the extended family necessarily, like as Jeff was alluding to earlier, but with the new group of people like fundraisers. Because the folks that are the folks that you are talking to now, they may be different than the folks that you were talking to before and when you were building the company. So the fundraising journey to me is very much, Eric, about what we have built. How did we build it? But now translating that to step 2, which is the next part of our journey for the company, making sure that we find the aligned partners. And I've gotten what I feel like is good at these discussions, so I can get the answers I need to get right away. So I know if a particular investor, if she or he is not interested right away, I can sense that. I can at least sense that right away. So it's almost like a spider sense of knowing, okay, this person's definitely, they have no idea what you're doing. They have no interest. You kind of have to move on from there. So
yeah, I know that sounds familiar to me. After you've done a few of them, and I actually got to the point where it's like, this is not the right time to be even trying to raise money for this, because I got the sense of like, the sort of like, we're interested in what you're doing, but you're not important enough for us to actually follow through with the conversation we've scheduled because something else more important came up. I was like, my spider sense was saying, stop trying to fundraise right now. This isn't, and it was the sort of, 2 years ago when money was getting, really difficult to raise. And then, it looked like it was getting better a few months ago, and now it's not anymore.
that's why
yeah, this is a familiar feeling. And I think it's probably true of anything you do. You've probably done at least dozens, if not hundreds or more of these conversations.
Yeah.
And they get it. You start to learn now what to look for.
Exactly. There is a lot of pattern recognition that goes on along there. But it actually goes a little bit to the point that we were talking about earlier, is that sure, the markets will cycle up and down. It has been tight since 2021. It's still tight to some degree, but I'm not in control of the markets. I'm in control of the team and the data. And so I I know I'm not immune to market forces by any stretch of the imagination, but if it's not something that I can control, I try not to worry about that too much because I can only control certain aspects of things, and I try to optimize for those.
Yeah, great.
Well, I think we've flown through half an hour, like
Yeah.
as always happens. So Shardule, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. I think Eric, I don't know if you want to do the wrap up or
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned in the lead-in, Shardule, we have our
ritual.
end of our episode ritual of going around and asking everybody to leave the audience with one thing. What I don't tell the guests is, and if you've watched our episodes, you guessed you have a before, then you know, but I always ask the guests to go first, so you have no time to think about it. So it's kind of a little mean fun thing for more fun for the host and the guest. But what's one thing you'd like to leave our audience with?
The one thing I'd like to leave the audience with is do whatever you can to maximize in-person interactions. And I get the irony of us having a virtual recording about this, but I do think that networking, while built on the strength of LinkedIn and or virtual networking events, nothing really seals the deal more than meeting somebody face to face and talking with them. So, if folks, wherever they are in their career or building strategy, just meet people face to face, and I think you can get so much more out of that rather than just shotgunning a whole bunch of virtual introductions. That's what I would love to leave the audience with.
Awesome. Well, before I give my one thing, Shardule, what is the best place for people to connect with you?
Yes, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can send me a personal message there. I'll be happy to reach out. My name is Shardule Shah. There's only one of me on LinkedIn, so it's pretty easy to find me.
Awesome. Well, I think, I think the thing that I found fascinating about this conversation is how much, and I think it makes sense, but I don't know if we always think about it, how much the people stuff really fundamentally matters. And, it's not everything, but it's a lot of the thing, right? Like if you don't get the people stuff right, so everything from, what you were talking about from what do you outsource, what do you keep in-house, how do you get the team to really become, I think, as effective and productive as they possibly can, I think is a really important point. So yes, you got to get the money, but you got to get the people doing the right stuff. I think that's really important. So that was my takeaway, and I will pass it to Elena.
So certainly. So first of all, Shardule, thank you for what you're doing, because it is high cost of entry. It is hard stuff. It is very innovative, and your children most certainly should be proud of what you're doing. So you have nothing to worry about. So thank you
They're
for that.
teenagers, they may not be, but they should be.
They're a little young.
They will be someday, right?
Exactly. So we have that covered. But that aside, I think I want to go back to the title of the episode and reiterate that it depends on your industry how you should KPI yourself, and it depends on your stage of the company. And sometimes you best have to, like you said, KPI yourself to your vision and to your view of success, and to the success in your category and what you're trying to accomplish in your vision and your goals. So in a world obsessed with KPIs, there needs to be strategic thinking. So that's my takeaway.
Love that.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the conversation, what you started with, Shardule, which was this concept of how do you figure out what to outsource and keep in-house? Like, I think that is a really important discussion. I think a lot of companies don't, they're doing it without they're doing what they're doing without thinking about it much. It's sort of their gut feeling, it's all gut feeling based. We should do it in-house versus doing it outsourced. And what I think is really exciting about your description of what you're doing is you're really trying to be like mindful about where, and you have an actual philosophy around that. And I think that might be more rare than that's maybe more of the exception. And I think that's such an important conversation. And I don't think, and Jeff, Elena, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've had that particular discussion in the past. So
a little bit with Magdi, but that's about where it ends.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Shardule. This was a fascinating conversation. I love hearing what you're doing and that you're still going strong. And obviously keep in touch with your success. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Elena. This was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. It was great to have you.
Bye.